Kutz is the Managing Director of Forensic Audits and Special Investigation at GAO. The FSI unit investigates waste, fraud, and abuse related to government programs and taxpayers' dollars. FSI has investigated abuses of Hurricane Katrina relief dollars, border security, and overtime and minimum wage complaints, among other topics. Welcome, sir.
Madam Chairwoman and members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to discuss the service-disabled, veteran-owned small business program. This program honors service-disabled veterans for their incredible service and sacrifice by providing contracting opportunities. Today's testimony highlights the results of our investigation into allegations of fraud and abuse in this program. My testimony has two parts. First, I will discuss cases of fraud and abuse, and second, I will discuss fraud prevention controls. First, we received over 100 allegations of fraud and abuse for this program, and I will note that we stopped counting at 100. From these allegations, we investigated 10 cases, which often included a number of affiliated firms and joint ventures. For these 10 cases, we found that they received $100 million of service-disabled sole source and set-aside contracts using various fraudulent schemes. These case studies also received over $300 million of 8A, Hub Zone, and other federal contracts. Key program eligibility requirements include: first, firms must be at least 51% owned by one or more service-disabled veterans. Second, the firm's day-to-day operations must be controlled by the service-disabled veteran or their caregiver. Third, the firms must perform 15 to 50% of the work. And fourth, the firm must be a small business. Examples of what we found include: first, a firm whose owner was not a service-disabled veteran. This firm fraudulently received $7.5 million of FEMA contracts for Hurricane Katrina and Rita trailer maintenance. Second, a firm that subcontracted 100% of its work to an international corporation headquartered in Denmark with annual revenues of $12 billion. That's right, 12 billion with a B. Third, a construction firm with no assets and no employees, passing through work to an ineligible firm. The owner of this shell company lived 80 miles away and managed a restaurant in another city. And fourth, another shell company with, again, no assets and no employees, passed through a $900,000 contract to an ineligible firm that delivered and installed the furniture. The monitor shows the shell company address, which is the owner's home. The owner of this company was actually a full-time contract employee at MacDill Air Force Base, which awarded him this contract. What's discouraging about many of these cases is that contracting officials were actively involved. For example, for the MacDill Air Force Base furniture case, contracting officials were aware of the shell company and that the owner was actually a full-time contract employee at the base. The base director of business operations also told us that MacDill had about $14 million of service-disabled sole source and set-aside contracts in 2008, and that 90% of the firms that received these contracts were front companies for large businesses. Other contracting officials weren't quite so candid. The monitor shows a picture of portable toilets at Fort Irwin in Texas. As you can see, the name of the non-service disabled firm is blocked off from the picture. However, it's clear that in cases like this, contracting officials know exactly who is providing the service. Moving on to my second point, there are no fraud prevention controls in place for this program. And as our case studies show, even individuals that lie about whether they are service-disabled veterans can receive millions of dollars of contracts. The only thing resembling a control for this program is the SBA bid protest process. In fact, for 4 of our 10 case studies, SBA determined that these firms were ineligible for the program. However, these firms were not only allowed to continue the contracts they received fraudulently, but they also received new service-disabled, set-aside, and sole-source contracts. And in no cases did we see anybody, including SBA or any other agencies, that have suspended or debarred anybody for fraud and abuse in this program. We are encouraged by the Veterans Administration's efforts to set up a process to validate the eligibility of firms doing business with the VA. We recommended that SBA, VA, and OMB look at the feasibility of expanding this validation process government-wide. In conclusion, for just 10 cases, we identified $100 million of fraud and abuse. This multi-billion-dollar small business program has no controls and no consequences for the few that are caught cheating. Unfortunately, the victims of this fraud are legitimate service-disabled veterans that play by the rules. Madam Chairwoman, I applaud you and this committee for supporting veterans today, and I look forward to working with all of you to help eliminate fraud and abuse from this important program. That ends my statement, and I look forward to all your questions.